All right, I'm kicking off the stream. Go ahead and start whenever, Jose.
Hi, good morning. This is April 5th, the community meeting for Kubernetes. This meeting will be publicly posted on YouTube, so please be mindful that what you're saying is being recorded. My name is Jose Palafox, and I work at Intel. I've been participating in the community for a couple of weeks now, just getting ramped in SIG, PM, and in contributor experience, but I've been absent for a couple of weeks, so my apologies to those folks. So today we've got a demo from JFrog, and I'll hand it off to our speaker to get us started there. So Janesh, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. So can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. And everybody else, if you can mute if you're not speaking, that would be super helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you to provide me opportunity to speak. So this is Nisa. I am a solution developer at JFrog, and today I will be demoing how to use Artifactory as a Helm repository and Docker repository, even spinning up Artifactory in Kubernetes using Helm chart. So right now I have my Kubernetes cluster up and running, which will be this cluster that I will be using. It's up and running. Let me connect to my cluster. It's a 3-node cluster with version of Kubernetes 196. So let me connect to my cluster. And I am connected. I will do Helm init, which will deploy the tailor in my Kubernetes cluster. I have already started kubectl proxy on the side to see the Kubernetes UI, and we can see that cluster is clean. Now, next step I will do is, so we have our official Helm chart for Artifactory release in official chart repository. We have 2 versions of our chart. One is Artifactory, which is Pro or OSS version, and the second is Artifactory HA is for Artifactory highly available. In this demo, I will be using Artifactory Pro. So what I will do, I will just copy the command and install Artifactory using Helm. Before that, let's do Helm repo list just to make sure I have my repo added. I will delete the old repo, which I'm not using. Okay, so now if I see I have 2 repos, stable and incubator, and then I will install Artifactory from stable repo. Okay, and so if we go back, what this installation will do, so basically Artifactory has uses a database. In this case, we are deploying Postgres with official Postgres chart, and then it deploys Artifactory itself, and then we are using Nginx as a load balancer to do reverse proxy for Docker registry. So it seems that it has installed deployed the Artifactory properly. It will take some time in having pod up and running and creating load balancer. Right now we see it's pending, so it will take a couple of seconds, but till then I can basically explain what this chart does. As I mentioned, it deploys Pro. It uses Postgres official chart of PostgreSQL, and then we use Nginx for reverse proxy. We also support Ingress, which you can use. Such support is already available, and we have added README how you can use Ingress with Artifactory to eliminate the use of Nginx. Meanwhile, let's go and check how deployment is doing in Kubernetes UI. So it looks Nginx is up, Postgres is up, Artifactory is taking some time. It is connecting to PV. Let's give it a couple of seconds more. Okay. Till then, we should, we already got the load balancer external IP. Okay, and seems that Artifactory is up and running. This is the onboarding experience of UI onboarding of Artifactory. What we'll need to do, we'll need to paste a license. In this case, I already have my license, which I will just copy and paste. Uh, you can basically, if you want to have a trial license, you can just go to jfrog.com/artifactory and request for trial license. You just need to fill the proper information and you will get a license in email. So let's go back. Artifactory is up and running. For this demo, I don't want to change the admin password. I'm not setting up any proxy. And this is our setup wizard. So basically with one click, you can set up all this repository. Now Visa Artifactory is universal binary repository because you can see yourself, we support pretty much all different package types, be it a Helm, be it a Docker, be it a Bower, be it NPM. In this demo, I will be using only Helm and Docker repository. So let me click on create. So what it did, it created 4 different repositories for Docker. Out of this, Docker local is a local repository in Artifactory. Docker remote is caching, it's proxying Docker hub. Bintray Docker remote is our official Bintray repository, Bintray Docker repository. And this Docker, it's a virtual repo, which is aggregating to all these 2 remote and 1 local repo. And same way, we created 3 repo for Helm local, which is local repository where you can publish your chart. Helm remote is proxying our stable repository. And Helm is a virtual repo, which aggregates both local and remote repo. So which is done. Now using Artifactory as Helm repo is way, way simpler. In this case, I will be using Helm virtual repository to pull and push artifact from. So from the setup wizard, you can basically get how to set, how to point your Helm client to artifact. I'm just copying this command. And here we show authentication. So, the previous version of Helm was not supporting authentication, but Ayal from Ayal Ben Mose from JFrog, he contributed support for authenticating remote repository, which will be available in next release of Helm. Till then, you can use an authenticated version. I will be using that. What I'm doing now is I'm adding a remote repo named Helm to my Helm client. And it's got added. Now let me do Helm repo update to update the index. And it will fetch the index from Artifactory. Now I will do, I want to install, but let me do fetch Artifactory chart from Artifactory repo itself. Spelling mistake.
2-minute warning.
Okay, we are almost done. So now if we go back to Artifactory UI and in repository list, we have Helm repository, remote repository, where we see that our Artifactory chart, which we fetched, got cached. And even you can see the information about the chart. Even it shows that the Artifactory chart has dependency on Postgres, and it calculated index like Helm repository does. Now let's push one of the charts. So right now I am in my example chart repository, where I have created an example chart called node version. Let me just make sure it's proper. Okay, let me package the chart. Okay, and then I will use JFrog CLI to point to Artifactory that we created. Let me go back and get the Artifactory UI. Oops, no ID. So, come on. Okay, my Artifactory is, my JFrog CLI is connected to Artifactory. Now I will push the archive to virtual repo. So here, this is U is upload. Node version is name of the archive, name of the chart, and I will upload it to virtual repo of Artifactory. It seems it is updated. Let's go back. And as a virtual repo is proxying the local repo, we see that chart node version got published here. It calculated the index. And if we want to fetch it, we can basically fetch it same way from Artifactory or install it from Artifactory just using this command instead of Artifactory. It will be node version.
I think we're coming up on time here, so if you want to just wrap up.
Yeah, so that concludes the demo of how you can use Artifactory as a Helm repository. Same way you can use it for a Docker registry. So if you want to give have a hands-on, we recently published a blog on JFrog, like how to use Artifactory as a Docker and Helm registry. This is just an example of simple CI/CD that you can do it. It has a link to an example GitHub repo where we have explained all the steps how you can set up Kubernetes, insta Helm, Jenkins, blah blah blah, and do CI/CD. So please try it yourself. Feel free to reach out to us in case if you have any question. With that, I'm done with the demo. Thank you, guys.
So
Awesome. Thank you so much.
If we have a few minutes.
We got 2.
Okay. What is the difference between the commercial version and the free version? And why did you demo the commercial version? I'm just wondering. And then how much does the commercial version cost?
So a good question. So difference, Craig, are you available? Or do you want to answer this question?
I'm happy to take that. Thanks, Joe. So the free version is our open source Maven repo implementation. The commercial version is where you get all of the other package type support.
Oh, okay.
Where you
so
also
there is no open source version that supports Kubernetes technologies?
That's correct with our current licensing model.
Okay. And then I saw that when you were logging in to the Helm chart, you were doing basic auth username password over HTTP. Is that your default? Because that seems incredibly insecure.
Yeah, that's a default, but with Artifactory, you have ability to create API keys, encrypted password, OAuth. You can bunch of things with Artifactory.
It's just quick and easy to do the demo this way.
Yeah. Well, all right.
Good point, Joe.
Great. Any other question, guys? Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in and demoing.
Can you drop the link that you mentioned in the notes? I've added a space for it.
Sorry, what was that request?
You mentioned a link to a blog post and that had a walkthrough. Can you please put that in the meeting notes?
Done.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, Josh, you ready to take it for a release here? Hello, Josh. Okay, apparently.
Is anyone from
Josh
release team here? I know we're just after a release, so there's not
sorry.
much going on. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Can you
here.
hear me now? Okay. It turns out I cannot share my screen because Zoom is still not supporting Wayland. I tried their experimental support and it does not work. So there are links for everything. If somebody else wanted to bring those up, that would be fantastic. Who is not having the screen sharing obstacles that I am. Is there somebody else who actually can share screens over Zoom?
I'm on it.
Okay, cool. If you want to bring up the release team. Okay, so we are now officially in week 1 of Kubernetes 1.11. I am the release lead for this cycle. one of the things that has me really super happy is that we have a populated release team. There's actually even a release note shadow whose PR is pending. So we have leads for all roles except patch release manager, which has some special requirements. And we have shadows for a bunch of other roles. There are a couple things we don't have shadows for. For example, we could really use a doc shadow if somebody was interested in getting involved in release and or in documentation. Please pop over to SIG Release or SIG Docs if you wanted to volunteer for that role. Or email me or Zach. So that's pretty good. Now, if you want to actually pop open the schedule. So we've put up a tentative schedule, and by tentative, I'm saying that pretty much immediately after this meeting is your last chance to raise issues with it that mean it needs to be changed. For 1.11, this release we've got the dates, the important dates on here. Feature freeze is April 24th. Ihor has already started collecting feature information. So that means that you really need to get your feature issues filed against the feature repo for the features that your SIG plans to implement for 1.11. The code slush will be May 22nd. Code freeze will be May 28th. Final documentation deadline is June 11th, and then a release targeted at June 26th. There is one sort of known problem with this schedule that we discussed, which is that June 26th is the week before the American Independence Day holiday that happens to fall into the middle of the following week, causing all kinds of disruption with American schedules. There wasn't really a good way around this. We didn't want to shorten people's development time, and moving the release 10 days later would have forced us to shorten the 1.12 and 1.13 cycles, which it also didn't seem like a good solution. So we'll just do our best to not slip more than a couple of days. So any questions or comments about the schedule? Okay, well, gathering feature information has started. Ihor has already started his tracking sheet. There's a link there. But again, file issues against the features repo. And please do it as soon as you know what you expect to get completed for 1.11. Thank you.
And then, Josh, I think you're up immediately again for graph of the week. So
well, no, Maciek was going to say something about 110.1.
Okay.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm not sure how much do I have to say. I'm planning to cut 1.10.1 on next Thursday, the 12th. So far, the biggest or most loudly requested fixes are to kubectl. And if you have anything that is, I will send an email with the draft release note and the pending PRs later today. If you want to cherry pick anything that is not in this email, please contact me. I think that's about it, really.
There's a question in the chat if you can post the 1.11 schedule into the chat link when you get a chance. And Aaron, are you able to keep presenting for graphic of the week?
Yeah, no
Josh,
problem. Josh is just going to say next, and I'll be his his slide clicker.
Thank you.
Okay. As people are probably aware, I've been on the release team for a few cycles now. This is a relatively new graph that we added to DevStats because of some problems I observed in the 1.9 cycle. In the 1.9 cycle, particularly, one of the things that I observed was that SIG node seemed to be a lot more heavily loaded with changes than the other SIGs. And then this was causing problems when it came to code freeze phase, et cetera, because it meant that there weren't enough people to look at the test fails for that, because that SIG had a disproportionate number of them. So I thought it would be really good for us to actually have a chart that gave us some general idea of current workload by SIG. If you want to click on the all PRs 6 months graph. Yeah. So, so this gives a rough idea of PR workload in the Kubernetes repo. This does not include other repos simply because other repos do not consistently use SIG labeling. And as a result, we couldn't really think of a good way to include them. So for example, SIG docs here is always going to show up with a lot less workload than they in fact have, since most of their work happens in a non-KK. But for the rest of the SIG, so there's what you're seeing here is what is called absolute PR workload. And that is the number of PRs multiplied by a coefficient for the size label on the PR. So for example, size M is multiplied by 1, size large is multiplied by 2, etc., to give an idea. Obviously, you know, there's a lot of fudge factor in that, but again, we're just trying to get a general idea of, is the SIG heavily loaded or not right now? Scroll down a little bit. So, and then the next thing that we actually have is relative PR workload. And what relative PR workload does is it compares that PR workload against how many people did we have making review comments in the previous week. That is, how many active reviewers do we have this week, to give an idea of what is the workload per reviewer in that SIG. So you want to click on the second link, which you may have already brought up in a tab. Yeah. So this is more useful if we look at it for individual SIGs. For example, one of the things that I was noticing in the 110 cycle was that it seemed like SIG scalability was being tagged in most of the PRs that were assigned to auto-scaling, but not necessarily vice versa. And actually looking at the PR workload does show that to be the case, because if you can see that the auto-scaling PRs are basically almost a pure subset of the scalability PRs. So we want to click actually the next one. And then looking at workload for SIG node shows us a completely different pattern in SIG workloads. Like in this case, so one of the important things about the way that this records PR workload is it's not new PRs within the time period. It's PRs that were open during the time period, because it's been my observation that it's actually often old PRs that cause the most work. You know, that is, a PR that's 3 months old is often 3 months old because it requires a lot of changes, possibly has adverse performance impact, possibly has test problems. In other words, it's a big work generator, so we don't want to not count the old PRs. And so then if you look at a heavily loaded SIG like SIG node, you actually discover the reason why they're heavily loaded is not so much that they're getting a whole bunch of new PRs, but that they have a lot of these really long-running PRs that can't be closed quickly. So at any given time, they have a whole bunch of open PRs under discussion. So then click on the next one. So there's also, now, these graphs are nice for showing how this changed over time. But if I want a snapshot and I want it to be more mathematical to say, hey, what's the workload for this SIG like right now? You can look at the PR workload table, which is the related chart. And this also gives you an idea of the relationship between the different numbers, right? So we have the number of actual PRs that are open. So like for SIG off, we have 41 PRs open. We have 21 reviewers who were active during the period. We have the absolute PR workload is 99, which is the 41 PRs multiplied by their size factors. And then finally, the relative PR workload is that divided by the number of reviewers. So it gives you an idea. Now, again, all of these numbers have substantial fudge factors involved. So we don't really care about the difference between, say, 4.7 and 3.1. What we care about is the difference between 4.7 and 0.6, because one shows a heavily loaded SIG and the other one shows a SIG that is not currently all that busy. And so with the release team, if we're looking at which SIG do we need to look in and intervene in and maybe ask some of our maintainers who do multiple SIGs to pitch in and help with, this gives us a better idea of who to target. So, oh, and then one of the other fun things is that for the table, we can actually pinpoint it per release. So we can look at who was the most heavily loaded during a specific release cycle. And I got a couple examples of that.
This all presupposes everything's labeled properly, though, right?
Yeah, and stuff that is not labeled first of all, stuff that has no SIG label at all is not going to show up in this chart. And the second thing is, you know, obviously the size labels are automatically determined. There's a lot of potential error for that, and it sometimes takes a while for the size labels to get applied. So there's that fudge factor. So again, like I said, look at this more. We look at this more in terms of, is this SIG heavily loaded or not? Not is this SIG 10% more loaded than they were last week? Which is the numbers are just not good enough to give us that kind of information.
And I think just to be clear here, like I'm looking at the range V19 to V110, PR milestones aren't included in this at all, right? This is purely just from the hard-coded date that we have when we started 1.9 to the hard-coded date when we started 1.10. Is that right?
Correct. And there's actually a reason to do it that way, because particularly at the end of the cycle when we're filing a lot of PRs to fix test fails, those often do not get correctly labeled with the milestone.
This range is actually from the GitHub tags, so it's from the 1.90 release to 1.10 release.
Mm-hmm.
It's all taken from the GitHub. It's not from the labels and not from the milestones on the issues.
Correct.
Any other questions here?
There was a question about what's the takeaway from the overall graph, Josh?
The main reason for having the overall graph is, for example, if you're looking at an individual SIG and you're seeing they have this huge spike in PR workload, one of the questions there is this a huge spike for that SIG, or are we just at that point in the dev cycle when a lot of people are filing PRs? And so that's the main thing I look at the overall graph for, is to say, hey, does, you know, SIG auth suddenly have a lot of PRs, or does everyone have a lot of PRs because we're in week 7 of the dev cycle, of the release cycle? You know, because that, you know, again, like I said, for my part in the release team, the reason I wanted this graph was to see where maybe intervention was required because a SIG was getting backlogged in a way that they would not be able to get out of by themselves.
So as far as what these charts mean and what we should do based off of them, this is still kind of an exploratory, here, wait, video, here we go. Hey, so what are all these charts? What should we do with them? What do they mean? Is kind of an exploratory thing. That's why we try and present a chart to the community each week. To see if these are helpful or not. This is sort of the first chart that was driven with some sort of use case in mind, at least from just like a release tracking perspective, if we can better understand which SIGs are more heavily loaded than others. What we should do based on that is definitely an open question. We would welcome continued collaboration over this sort of stuff in the DevStats Slack channel. We also have recurring meetings where we sort of discuss what we're trying to do with DevStats. We are looking at producing sort of a prioritized queue of work to make this more useful. There are those of us who have the opinion that a lot of these charts are really shiny, but maybe not so useful, and we kind of have the paradox of paralyzing choice. There are so many dashboards to look at. What do they all mean, and why should I care? Is something that can probably be better answered if we just trim the number down to something that's more reasonable. So look for a presentation about this at KubeCon EU, and that's kind of sort of the timeline we're looking at in terms of trying to make this more actionable. But we are genuinely interested in any and all help to make this more usable. DevStats is basically possible to use for all CNCF projects, and I have to give a huge shout out to Lucas, who was talking earlier about the GitHub tags. He's like incredibly responsive if you have questions about new dashboards or what's going on behind the scenes. He's great for it. But as far as we can tell, Kubernetes is really the only active user of these dashboards, and we are trying to use it to kind of put together ways of measuring project health overall from a reporting perspective, as well as what are dashboards that can tell us we should do a thing right now because we've crossed some threshold or something. Anyway, good stuff. Thanks, Josh. Jose, back to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, thanks everybody. That was actually really interesting just to listen along to. Okay, so we'll move on to our SIG updates. So Rob, I know you're a little tight on time. Do you want to jump in and go first here?
Thank you. Yeah, this is Rob Hirschfeld with SIG Cluster Ops. And the story with SIG Cluster Ops, if you've been following it, is sort of the same trend we've had. We're having trouble having quorum. Chris McKinney and I and other leaders in the past have wanted Cluster Ops to be a place where we can collect operators and operators come together, but it's something where community is going to have to decide they want to contribute and be part of that. So we're sort of still keeping it going. We're looking for additional leaders to come in who have a passion for collecting operators and getting people going. And that's, we don't want to lose it. We think it's important. I sort of see a trend where the on-premises or the independent operators for Kubernetes, do need a place to collaborate. And Chris and I are both vendor neutral, so we end up being reasonable hosts. We just don't have enough time on it. And there's no work product out of Cluster Ops, so we either need to switch to a working group or some other title. That's the update. If you're interested in, we're having a meeting next Thursday, 2 hours. We do 2 hours after this meeting. Please, come by or send me a Slack and let me know if you're interested in helping out. We think it's important. We just need some help.
I just got a quick question statement for you, Rob. With on-prem kind of folding back into a working group and kind of, would it make good sense to maybe consider putting the kind of on-prem ops stuff under SIG cluster lifecycle and maybe adding a meeting under there so that there's less overhead as far as having another list, another place to go, and then, I don't know, someone from cluster lifecycles here, maybe as people come in, you just triage them to the right place.
That's exactly what our goal would be. We don't see a need to have cluster a SIG proliferation here. We don't have a big stake in being holding a flag for the chair positions. We're really just trying to make sure there's a home, and we want to participate.
Okay.
So, happily consolidate SIGs.
Yeah. And I just meant a quick statement for everyone that it's totally fine when we do this, and I think it really helps the project to not have unnecessary overhead when we do it, because SIGs are relatively cheap to run, but there's also a lot of overhead there as far as that kind of stuff. So if don't be afraid to ever just hold a meeting without feeling that you need, infrastructure there in place. You can just schedule a meeting and get people there. So thanks, Rob. I appreciate that.
No worries. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Rob. I think we'll move on to SIG Docs. So Zach, you're up to speak here.
Awesome. Good morning. SIG Docs is growing. We have 2 new SIG Doc maintainers, and we have 5 new contributors, regular contributors, people who have begun contributing and participating actively in weekly community meetings over the last 2 months. And that has shown us that the experience of our new members has shown us that our contributor guidelines need work. It is not clear from our current guidelines how to become a member of the Kubernetes organization, and there are ways that we can link better to existing documentation, but frankly, our overall contribution guidelines need revision. So that is a project that we are undertaking in Q2. Let's see. Another piece of news is that we are moving forward with a plan to migrate the Kubernetes website from Jekyll to Hugo. And we have met with a contractor. We're contracting with Bjorn Erik Pedersen, who I think at this point has contributed like 80% of the Hugo code base, who's going to do our website migration for us. We synced up with him yesterday for an initial estimate scope of problems to solve. And we're on track to proceed for migration with a completion date targeting April 30th. Another piece of migration work, we have migrated the blog, the Kubernetes blog, off of Blogger and into the GitHub workflow. So if you visit the blog, you'll notice that if you go to blog.kubernetes.io, it should hopefully be pointing now and redirecting to kubernetes.io/blog. We have not posted, we haven't put up a blog post on it yet, but that is scheduled for the next day or two to go out and announce that more widely to the community. And the main reason for doing that migration was to resolve the technical debt of continuing to work in Blogger and to make life easier on the actual blog team. Working in Blogger is not especially a joy. And so getting that integrated more into the SIGDocs workflow and getting them set up. And I want to shout out again, I want to shout out much gratitude and thanks to Test Infra for the automation bots that make it possible to have blog level ownership of PRs and approvals. It's awesome. And it's made our lives a lot easier. So those are the big pieces of news from SIGDocs. Happy to field questions if you have any.
So you mentioned tightening up the contributor guidelines. Is that for SIGDocs specifically, or are you looking across all of Kubernetes?
Both. We're looking both specifically at SIGDocs and well, not specifically the docs aspect of Kubernetes.
Okay. Yeah, because I just think, definitely there'd be worth some coordination there with ContribX around that.
Absolutely.
And the contributor guide that's going on there. And I just wanted to make sure that those connections were made.
Thank you. Yes.
So there's a bit of a pending queue for the Kubernetes blog. Have those blog posts awaiting review, have those been migrated over to GitHub, or do people need to resubmit them?
No, they, with the ones that are in queue, Caitlin Barnard is the blog coordinator there, and she will handle that and open PRs as needed.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Zach.
Thank you very much.
All right, unfortunately, our last SIG group was not available to speak today. We had an illness, so they're going to move to May 24th, so you can get an update for SIG service catalog late May. So sorry for that. Up next, we've got announcements. So George, you've got 2 announcements coming up, and then Ihor and Aaron, you guys are up at the plate next. So I'll hand it off to George.
Yeah, just a reminder that the Contributor Summit is the day before KubeCon. That's May 1st. And if you click through the link, you need to register for this, so we get you the right contributor t-shirt and food and everything, even if you've already registered for KubeCon. So please remember to register for that. If you're having problems with the form or anything, just ping myself or Paris. And for the current contributor track, that's if you've gone to a Contributor Summit before, we have sessions that we want people to vote and stuff like that, and that will be sent out on Monday. Next is on Reddit this Tuesday. We're going to have what they call an AMA, that's Ask Me Anything. That's where people on Reddit in the Kubernetes subreddit will ask a bunch of questions about Kubernetes, and people will answer. I've gotten about 5 or 6 volunteers so far, but the more the merrier. So if you're interested in that, if you use Reddit, feel free. It's going to be about a 6-hour window where people just ask questions on Reddit, and then you just post them. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Ihor, you ready to go?
I don't see people on.
All right. Well, keep moving on then. Aaron.
Okay, so hang on. Where's the thing? Hi, everybody. It's me again. So I have 2 things to talk about. The first one, I will share my screen to show you what's going on. So if you click this GitHub labels link, it's going to take you to this page here. This page is generated based on this YAML file. This YAML file is consumed by a tool that's responsible for pushing labels to every single repo in the Kubernetes organization. And then we generate documentation based on that YAML file. So if you have any questions about what a given label means, it tells you a little bit about it, tells you who can add it, and it tells you what Prow plugin is responsible for it. These are all deep links. Definitely appreciate any feedback on what we could do to make this more useful. Much as we did with bot commands, where there used to be sort of like a static markdown table that was maintained by humans and it eventually turned into a live updated page, we'd like to move in the same direction with this. So for example, right now, Prow has a plugins page. You get to the here from there. I could have clicked the link to show that. Anyway, so this shows you sort of what commands do, and then the commands sort of also show like what labels and such they can add. So we're going to try and tie all of that together. So again, that's go.pates.io GitHub labels. So there's that. Second thing is the AppDev working group has recently put together a Kubernetes application survey, and we would welcome your participation and sharing this survey link with anybody you know who's using applications or deploying or operating applications on Kubernetes. We plan on making this feedback public at the conclusion of the survey, and this is kind of intended to just give us a picture of like, how do you Kubernetes these days? What can we as the Kubernetes community and project do to better serve ourselves in the direction of applications? So the link to this is in the meeting notes right here. It's from WG AppDev. It's also linked in their Slack channel, and I'm sure we'll send something out to Kubernetes Dev as well. That's it for me. I will hand off to Dims, unless there are any questions.
We have Dims on the line. Let's see here. Looks like not. So we're going to keep on moving to shoutouts. So we have just a couple this week. I think the first one goes out to Ashwarya. And next to the Meet Your Contributors team that participated yesterday. So Guinevere, Aaron, Chris, Sadev, I'm going to mess up your name, I'm really sorry, Sadev, and Carolyn. So thank you for participating in the Meet Our Contributors. Paris, it looks like you have some notes that you're putting in currently. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you wrote there or around
sure.
Okay, cool.
Sure. Meet Our Contributors is a once a month, I'd like to do twice a month live stream series where it's very similar to user office hours. However, consider it contributor office hours. If you're a new or current contributor and you are curious about why your test's flaking or why a certain contributor got into Kubernetes or anything in between, this is the venue for you. So I appreciate all contributors that have volunteered to date and would love to see more new faces take questions. We have fun, P.S.
All right, and I think that's a meeting. Unless anyone else has anything to bring up, we'll see you all next week. Thanks everybody for participating.
Thanks everyone.